Alrighty, everybody. Give a second for some folks to join in. It's time to do a live stream. Got my computer set up here on the left side of the screen, so if you're curious what I'm looking over at from time to time, it's so that I can keep an eye on the chat. I have my phone flipped the other direction right now. It's just so that it's a little bit better quality. So, on this fine Saturday, what is everybody up to? What are you working on your minis? Maybe you have some questions. I have put together this live stream because I want to donate to UNICEF, and I think it would be a really good time to, if you guys have questions, use the super chat function, make a small contribution of any amount, and that money is going to go 100% dollar for dollar after YouTube takes their fees out directly to UNICEF. So it would be super, super cool if we could reach a goal of maybe 150, 200 bucks. I think it would be really, really cool if we can, provide any support to this organization. They have partnered with the World Health Organization in order to combat the effects of COVID-19, specifically the things that are impacting people all over the world. So since this is a worldwide channel, I figured we'd pick a worldwide organization. So, checking on the live stream now. Classic Mini Garage, thanks for joining in. Michael Rennick, thank you so much. So if you don't know how to use the super chat function, underneath where you actually type in the live chat, there's a little dollar symbol. So if you click on that, depending on, you can either post a super sticker, which is just a sticker, super chat. That super chat is going to allow you to send a highlighted message, and those messages that you send through are definitely going to be ones that I answer, on the episode this time. And you can choose any amount for donation. I think the more you donate or the more you spend there, the more characters you get in your message. I don't know exactly how it works, but that's kind of the idea. Mr. Phillips says, question for you. I've got a twin bolt 1972 subframe with a 5-inch crack on the top of the strut tower. How do you go about the fix? So that strut tower, assuming it hasn't been deformed in any way, you need to remove the subframe, and you can actually weld the seam on those top strut towers. The main thing is that if it was deformed at all or torqued, or if there's any sort of movement in that subframe, it's probably not something that's going to be easily repairable, because that does help determine how straight the car tracks, depending on how much damage radiates down to that top arm. Michael Rennick, thank you so much for kicking us off at 20 bucks. I really, really appreciate it, and that gets us closer to our, let's say, $200 goal. Let's see. James Campion, thanks for joining. It's good to see you on here. Dave Halstad, good evening from Britain. It is 2 o'clock here, and it is sunny and wonderful. What's the weather like there in Britain today? Renee, hey, thanks for joining in. Drew's Page, thanks for joining from Brighton. Andrew Burton, hey man, is this the Andrew Burton up in Tennessee? If it is, thanks for joining in. Michael Cristiano, good lord. Hello from Italy, thanks for joining. Mom, thanks for joining. Thanks for donating $2. I appreciate that. Stuart says, hi Cole, I've been following the supercharger build. What compression ratio do you intend to be running, and how is the cam duration lift set up specifically for the application? So the cam that has been provided to me, I actually bought this as part of the kit from Stuart over at VMAX. It's a custom ground cam. He said it's a 276 profile, so it's a little bit hotter cam, but, excuse me, a little throat clearing there. Since it's a hotter cam, normally you'd have kind of a lumpy idle with that, but since I'm running EFI on the engine, it's going to kind of normalize that. The EFI has a lot more control over idle. So while it is going to be a little bit lumpier, it's going to end up kind of smoothing that out. I don't know the exact compression ratio that I'm aiming for here. I basically got the parts recommended to me directly from Stuart, so I took his recommendation and basically went to the sites and just bought the stuff to make sure it matches up. Probably should figure that compression ratio out because I've had that a few times. That's been a question. Mr. Phillip, thank you so much for the donation of $5, getting us closer to that $200. Chris Cook, hi, how's it going? Thanks for joining. Edward, evening call from the UK. Weather has been lovely, and it's been that way here as well. I've actually got a UPS delivery coming in right now, so I might have to sign for that. Should be okay. Michael says, I'm here working on the water pump and timing chain cover seal. When I reinstall the cover, is there a need to torque the cover in any specific pattern? Nope, I don't torque that in any sort of pattern. I will say I normally go in like a crisscross. Basically anything that's got more than one bolt, I try to go in a crisscross pattern. So things like the head, that is like you start in the center and work your way out. And the timing cover I'd probably just do in a crisscross to keep it even. Haley, yo, tune it in from our office about 75 feet away. Thank you so much for joining, babe. What other questions do you guys have for me? I am working real hard to get. Lost my train of thought there. What other questions do you guys have for me for this live chat? For those of you who are just joining in, got a special note here. Hopefully this is readable. Let me know if you can't read that, and I'll just take a second to mention everything that's on there. Woxy says, when installing the front disc brake upgrade with an adjustable proportioning valve, what is the right way to adjust the rear pressure safely? Adjusting the pressure on those with a proportioning valve there's no sort of special procedure there, at least not that I'm aware of. I have a proportioning valve on the back of my Mini. The key is you are trying to bleed out all of that fluid back there without getting any air in the system and sucking the air back up in there. It's the same process as bleeding your brakes normally. Start with the back, the one that's farthest away from your master cylinder. So if it's left-hand drive, you are working on your back right wheel first. If it is right-hand drive, it's the back left wheel first. Alex Toon says, when is Bad Wolf going to hit the road? That's a good question. I'm getting really, really close to finishing up this engine, and all the kind of wiring and like little stuff that had to be done in the car has pretty much been done. Fuel tank's been swapped out, so as soon as I get the engine done, it probably won't be much longer, maybe a month or so, hopefully sooner than that. Dad, thank you so much for the $50 donation. That definitely gets us really, really close to our $200 goal. Maybe I should increase that goal. Maybe we should pop that up to $500. $500 in an hour. I think that we can reach that goal. I think we can. Chris Cook says, if the outer race on the first motion bearing is pitted, will this make noise? I don't know if it'll make noise, but if it's pitted, I would probably go ahead and replace it. Those first motion bearings are they are a little irritating to replace, I will say, but the race itself, the bearing, is not very expensive at all. So if you have it apart, just go ahead and replace it. It's a lot of peace of mind for not very much money at all. Renee says, doing a rebuild, still in the teardown, let's see here, where you want to go with the rebuild, body or engine first. So personally, it depends on how much time you have, really. If you have a longer rebuild process, the rebuild time setup, I would start with the body so that you have a nice, good solid body to put the engine back into. The engine can be outside of the car and you can kind of do that simultaneously too. But I would say if you're just trying to get it on the road, just start with the engine, get the engine done and drive it. But if you have some more time, I'd increase that and do the body first. Josh says, hey Cole, looking at spark plugs, any idea what would cause cylinder number 1 and 4 to look good and 2 and 3 to look rich? That's actually pretty common in the A series because of the Siamese ports. I'm going to rotate you guys here real quick so you can see something. And this is technically a spoiler. I've not shown this to anybody yet. All right, so got the supercharged engine here. And this is your intake, your 2 intake ports right here. So normally the 2 center ports, or at least the 2 center, the 2 cylinders in the center here are always going to end up being a little bit richer, just because of the way the air is dispersed between the 2 ports into the 2 intake ports. So you can see here, there's basically a shared channel between the 2 cylinders, so they're going to always be a little bit richer. If the outer 2 are looking good and the center ones are, not too rich, then you're probably in good shape. Let's rotate this back. Okay. That's back in. Mom, thanks for the other donation of 25 bucks. I really appreciate that. Michael says, I replaced the gasket on the valve cover a few months ago. It still seems to be weeping under it. How tight is the correct tightness for the 2 bolts on the cover? I don't actually know the torque spec off the top of my mind, and I'm not sure if the Haynes manual has that in there. I normally just tighten it down till that gasket is really smushed in there. So I have a valve cover here with a gasket. How fun. So sometimes these gaskets will go from sitting right here and they'll kind of flop their way in. They'll kind of, recess in, and it might still weep, especially if you have one of the kind of like more custom valve covers that are just a flat surface right here. These earlier ones are actually a little bit better at sealing because they have these catch tabs right here that hold the gasket in place almost. It's actually pretty convenient. So that could be it. I also like to put valve cover or gasket sealer on this to help increase that seal. It does make it a little bit harder to get off later down the road, but I think it's worth it if it doesn't leak oil. So that's what I'd recommend. Check that, make sure that's working. And then sometimes the posts that go into the top of these right here are not, you might have longer posts that are, or longer nuts that are made for a bigger valve cover. So if you're using a standard one like this or a shorter one, they might not be actually pinching down the valve cover enough. Miss Little Big Mac says, hey, one of my carbs is sucking way more air than the other. They're HS4, how do I balance them? So if that's happening, it means you don't have, most likely it means that you have too much, or not enough dashpot oil in one of the dashpots, specifically the one that is sucking too much. So dashpot oil helps to slow and normalize the speed at which the actual SU plunger actually goes up and down. So if you don't have any oil in that, sometimes what will happen is it'll open really, really fast when you press the throttle. And if you have 2 carbs and one has more oil in it, you're going to get uneven movement in those carbs. So I would check that. Finley says, engine building novice here. I was wondering what you could do about cleaning, what you do about cleaning bolts, inner surfaces, the outside of the engine surface rust from parts like the flywheel, to make it spotless before a rebuild. So for the flywheel, the outer surfaces, the things that don't have any sort of mating surface, so like where the clutch does not go, you can use just like wire brush, anything like that, because they don't mate with anything. I will say that most flywheels end up rusty just because they're untreated metal that is normally just exposed to the air. As far as cleaning bolts, engine stuff, I will say that most of the time, I'm not one of those folks that takes old bolts and puts them back on. I will say most of the time I replace the bolts and I get new grade 8 bolts, and I just like getting them replaced and using newer stuff. Sorry, there's a noise outside, it's kind of weird. it just gives me a little bit more peace of mind. But some folks will use CLR. It's calcium, lime, and rust. Something, I think that's what it stands for. And it's pretty low abrasion, and it's good at cleaning off rust and debris off of parts, grease, things like that. Drew's Page, thank you so much for the £5 donation. Your question is, will you be doing a dyno episode with this build? Yes, definitely, without a doubt. My goal, I would have liked to run in the engine on a dyno, but I must have called 15, 20 dynos within like 150 mile radius of my house, and none of them are willing to run my engine in outside of the car. Everyone wants it to be a chassis dyno, which means in the car, wheels on rollers, which is a shame, but it's kind of the drawback of living in the US where everyone's set up for big muscle car engines and no one has any sort of equipment for these older mini engines. So I will be doing two things. I'll be running the engine on a stand here at my house to run it in at 2,000 RPM outside of the car. That'll let me check over things a little bit easier. Then once it's run in, drop the engine into the car and actually bring it to a dyno and get it dialed in. Carlos says, found what looks like a 3-inch to 4-inch long resistor on passenger side of the engine bay, right-hand drive car. Not sure what it is, has 2 wires, one is always hot. I'm not really sure what that is. I probably have to see it to know exactly what it is. So if you're thinking about if you want some more help, send me an email with a picture at classicminidiy@gmail.com. Happy to help you out there. Oh, Steve answered. I did not see his response. Carlos, that's your headlight dip resistor. There you go. I don't have one of those on my car. My car is just, it has high beams, but I believe that dip resistor sits down on the bulkhead. It's where you actuate the high beams, right there on the bulkhead. Chris Cook says, best car for a 1275, twin 1 1/4 or HIF 44. I've done both, and I really actually liked both of them for different reasons. The twin 1 1/4s have a lot more low end torque, and then the HIF 44 has more power at the top band. Depends on how you drive your car. I like low end torque. I like power at the bottom of my RPM band rather than at the top, just because it's the way I drive. So really, you got to know, how do you like to drive the car? Do you like having the power zipping around in the city, or do you want like top end power so you can hit the highways really easy, something like that? It's not a huge difference between the two. I will say the HIF, the single carb, is going to be a lot easier to keep in tune. The dual carbs are a little bit more work. Haley says, non-car question, YouTube noob here, is there a live count for the donations somewhere? I don't know. Let's see if I can see that. It doesn't show it anywhere. It just shows the donations at the top of the screen, the most recent ones. I would love if we had a counter, but I don't think we do. By my guesstimation, though, I think we are right at about 110, 120 bucks. Maybe somebody who can scroll through here and do some math would be willing to do that. Steve says, doing a cracking job, Coleslaw. Lots of love from the UK. Thanks, Steve. Thank you for joining, and I cannot wait to see your turbo engine when you're all done with it. Really excited about that. Derek, thanks for the $10 donation. Appreciate that. And thanks for the kind words. Classic Mini Garage, Cole, we had the same dyno issue with Dave Jag's engine. That's why we had to put the engine in my Mini. Huh. I didn't realize. Yeah, it's super frustrating. I don't know... I mean, it's like they're just engines, you know. You bring them to the shop, and I just make a plate that mounts to the flywheel or mounts to the open end of the transmission. But I don't know. People aren't willing to get their hands dirty in some stuff. Dave Halstead says, my 1966 Austin Mini 850 came in Riviera Blue. Your engine blue is very close. Was that intended or just pure luck? Yeah, that was just that. I will say that's just pure luck. My engine blue is technically, oh god, this is terrible. It's technically Ford corporate blue because I did get my paint from an American company called Eastwood, and their blue, the only one that they really offered, I think they had a light blue, but it was called Ford corporate blue. I will say the Ford Corporate Blue is pretty close to the blue on my car, which, why don't I rotate you guys over here so you can get a look. So on the left side, there's the blue of the engine. And we rotate the other direction, and blue's pretty close. Ignore the dirty window, but yeah, I'll let you guys be the judge. Oh, actually on the back of my phone here, it's got a counter. So we are up to $128 donated for the COVID relief. So if you guys are wanting to keep donating, we're trying to hit $500 in an hour. There we go. Josh, thank you so much for the $10 donation. Matthew Keller says, best flywheel puller that you've used, and what's the biggest sockets that are needed for an engine strip down? Let's see here. Well, to answer your first question, my drawer's almost so finicky. The best flywheel puller that I have ever used is the one from John Guess over at Guessworks. So it's this big honkin' metal unit here, and then you have your actual pushing surface here. It's an enormous threaded piece of steel. This is the best flywheel puller that's on the market. This will get literally any flywheel off. The only drawback with this is that it is not something that you can use while the engine is in situ in the car. So I have this one, and then I have a standard flywheel puller that I got from 7 Mini Parts, which is also incredible, works great, and I will say that both of them have stood up to the test of time. This one I've not had as long, but I can't imagine that this is ever going to fail. And then the other question was the biggest sockets that are needed for an engine strip down. Let's see here. So I know for sure that, yeah, the biggest socket that I need on the Mini, and this is the biggest one I own, is a 1.5 inch socket, and I will say that you absolutely need a deep socket version of this. I have a short one as well, but this deep socket is necessary to get the main shafts, the actual pinion nut off. It just, you can't get it off if you have a shallow socket. It just won't come off. Also, one other thing that a few people kind of often get confused by is that the Mini is old. That's not the confusing part, though. The Mini, because it was old, was actually still using the standard Imperial system for all of its nuts and bolts. So a lot of people think, well, it's a British car, it's something that's in, from the European continent, so I need metric, and it's actually a standard car, an Imperial bolts and nuts car. The latest ones, the ones in '99 and 2000, that kind of that era, they might have switched to metric, but most of them are Imperial. Dad, Mr. Phillip, thank you for doing the math on that. I appreciate it. Joel says, hey Cole, electrical question. My headlights went out, high beam is still working, and the very low ones, but the normal headlights are not. I feel like most of these have a single bulb. I would check just the connections between your bulbs and the actual switches. Follow those, make sure that, get a little test light and test to make sure that when you press the high beam button, power is being sent to all of them. When you turn the high beam button off, the power is still being delivered by the main wire. It might be that it's just a simple short in the wires. Something could have come unplugged. I don't think that they use dual bulbs in these. I think all of them are a single bulb with different amounts of power being delivered. Maybe somebody can help correct that. Drew's page says 1.5 for the flywheel and 1 and 5 or 15 sixteenths for the bottom pulley. That's interesting. Are you sure it's 5/16. Huh. Yeah, oh yeah. That's still a little bit smaller though. 5/16. Yeah, not 15. Finley says, my engine doesn't idle that smoothly and the tappets make a pretty noticeable noise. Is there common issues to know of before I run through the standard routines to try and sort it out? So simple things, I would follow your fuel line, make sure there's no kind of kinks in it. One of the people who are on my Patreon actually found a kink in their fuel line and they had all sorts of carb issues and they fixed that kink, aka replaced the line, and after doing that the car ran so much better. So check your fuel lines, make sure there's no kinks, the hose hasn't collapsed, anything like that. Next up, if it's idling kind of weird, you might have, I don't know if you have any information about the performance upgrades to it, you could have kind of a lumpy cam, meaning that it's a cam that is tailored for the car to be moving, running, and you get better performance out of the car, but at idle sometimes it ends up with kind of a lumpy idle. If the tappets are loud though, it could be as simple as the tappets need to be adjusted. Which is something that I would definitely check out. It's a pretty simple job to do. Just follow the instructions in the Haynes manual, testing the opposite valve to whichever one is fully compressed. I have a video on that. It's a little bit older, it's a while back, but if you search through my old videos, there's one that talks about adjusting that clearance. Michael says, I imported my 90 Mini from Japan a few years ago. There's a mix of imperial and metric fasteners on the accessories. I think whoever had it before me used what they had on hand. Yeah, that's sounds like a headache, but it does kind of make sense. I imagine it's harder to get standard imperial fasteners and bolts and things in places that don't use that system anymore. Martin Powell says the later Minis used a mixture of metric and imperial from factory, but still mostly imperial for the important bits. I'm guessing things like inside the engine. I bet those didn't change. Ilias says you do not you replace the rubber coins on a classic Mini front and back. Are there special tools for it necessary, or can you do all four without special tools? What rubber pieces? I'm not quite sure what you're referring to there. Let's move this. Andrew says, any insight into capping off the heater valve? I will say, what is the, actually let me ask you this, what is the motivation for capping off the heater valve? Generally speaking, it's good to have that coolant moving past and out the top of the head. It increases the flow and increases the ability for the engine to cool itself. If you cap it, unless you're running like a dry deck system or something like that, if you cap it, then you end up forcing the hot coolant to stay in the head longer. So yeah, curious what the motivation is there. Classic Mini Garage, thank you so much for the 10-pound donation. We are getting closer. Let me look at the count back here. We're at 140 United States dollar dues. The goal is to hit 500 if we can in donations before the end of the live stream. And we have had this going for about 28 minutes. So, you know, I'm aiming at an hour here. And if we can, let's hit 500 in an hour. I think we can do it. Matthew Keller says 1 3/8 and 1 7/16 aren't used for any fittings off the top of your head. Nothing that's off the top of my head, although those bigger sockets, I know they get kind of expensive as you get to the much larger sockets, but a good set that ranges up to 1.5 should cover all of the bases there. Although I can't think of any bigger, or any nuts, bolts, anything like that that are any smaller than that in between those. Mr. Phillips says, does he mean rubber cones? Let's see here. Assuming that you, Ilias, assuming that you are referring to the rubber cones, that is the only special tool that you'll need, and most likely you'll need this to install the new ones, is a rubber cone compressor. And it's basically a piece of steel threaded rod that runs all the way down into the cone. and then you tighten it up. It squeezes the cone up so you can reinstall your high-low or your lower trumpet, and then you release the compression on that rubber cone and it sinks back down into place. Martin Powell, thank you for the £1.99. I'm not actually sure, £1.99, is that how you say it? Super sticker, it looks like, because of the thumbs up. Thank you for that donation. Oh, Paul, I forgot that you changed the name to Classic Mini Garage. I was like, these answers sound a lot like Paul, but I couldn't remember. Andrew says, currently live in Florida, don't need the heater. I could reroute it directly back into the radiator. Yeah, so that's actually what I normally do. I reroute, let's see if I have a hose here. I don't have the hose out right now, but basically I take a hose, one that's a little bit longer than this, and we'll run the hose directly out of the port on the top of the head and into the return on that lower elbow bracket. That said, a heater, while you won't use it in Florida, is going to be a great way to increase your capacity, your total fluid capacity in your car, which is going to increase the cooling potential of that fluid. So having the heater installed but not using it is actually a really great thing to have in a really hot climate like that. I previously removed my heater, and I found that with a heater installed, I had a much easier time keeping my engine cool, because there's a secondary radiator that's outside of the engine bay where some of that heat can radiate off, and in rough situations you can flip the heater on, and cool some of that air inside the compartment. Obviously you're turning the heat on in the summer and it's miserable, but you know, desperate times. All right, folks, we have had quite a few questions today. I am really enjoying this. Hopefully you guys have some more you can ask. If not, I can give you kind of a tour around my supercharged build. It technically is a sneak peek because I haven't finished editing the video that is related to the stuff that I can show you right now. Got the supercharger back here, got an extra set of roller rockers. I need to send these back to MED. They sent those by mistake. And then obviously my supercharged engine is just off to the side here. In fact, I could even spend a little bit of time showing you guys what the supercharger looks like when it's set on the back of the engine, if you think that might be something you want to see. Let me know if that's something you want to see. Let me know by posting some donations and seeing if we can get closer to 500. Hopefully we can. Matthew says, have you thought about fitting individual throttle bodies to a head? So yes, this was actually a huge consideration with the EFI setup on this. I was considering putting in 2 throttle bodies on the end of the supercharger, and then running a throttle position sensor and a separate ECU, all that stuff. And I might still do that in the future. But for right now, I ended up using kind of like a all-in-one kit that's made by a US company called Holley. They used to do carburetors for muscle cars, but they're a huge company. They've branched into fuel injection conversions, new carburetors, all sorts of crazy stuff for muscle cars mostly. And I have a double barrel system that's going to get put on this supercharger that's going to solve that need in this case. Michael says, what are you doing for cooling on the supercharged engine? So I'm doing a combination of some things. So let's take the supercharger here and show you guys. So this is the intake right here, and 2 ports right down here. These are not something that you always see on these setups because not all of them have it installed, but this is what's called a charge cooler. And so in this case, what we're going to be doing is running a separate water channel through this hole here, and it's going to cool down my inlet temperature to help deliver cooler air from the beginning. And then this will run out to a radiator. And funny enough, this is just a computer radiator. So this is a 380 millimeter radiator. It might be a little bit too big, we'll see. But I'm going to install 3 12 volt fans on it, and The water goes in and out here, gets cooled through this radiator, and so that's going to cool the actual inlet. As far as engine cooling goes, that's going to be kind of a, we'll add things as necessary. At minimum, I have my standard radiator that's going to go on the side of the car. That's going to remain there. I'm going to be using a deep impeller water pump, so it's going to move more water. I have a slightly enlarged pulley for the water pump itself. That's this right here. With a larger diameter, the same amount of rotational force is going to move more fluid, or rather slow the fluid movement down. So we'll be moving a large volume of fluid at a slower rate so it has more time to cool in the radiator. And then, if that doesn't finish off, if that doesn't keep it cool, then we'll start considering adding supplemental radiators. Something small, something bespoke, up in the front of the car. I am talking with some folks over in the UK who I'm going to work with and see if we can create a custom radiator, if necessary, to go in the front. Nathaniel says, I have a knocking noise. Oh, let's see here, I missed a message from Ilias. Ilias says, I want to replace all the rubber suspension coins. My coins were smashed. Do I need to go stock or race coins better? I think you're referring to the race cones, or sorry, the rubber cones. I don't know of anything that's called coins on the car, but those rubber cones, I would stick with standard unless you are running. If you're actually going to be tracking the car, if you're going to be racing it, consider those race cones. But they tend to be more rigid and less comfortable while you're driving the car, and the stock cones are great. Just get them from a reputable parts supplier. Looks like, because you said you're doing an MOT, that you're in the UK. If that's the case, then Mini Spares, check them out. Make sure you get the genuine cones. They're a much better quality rubber. Nathaniel says, a knocking noise when the car is idling. Dip the clutch, it goes away. Remove the engine and check the idler bearings, which seem okay. The primary gear has excess movement. Have you seen this? Yeah, so if the primary gear has any sort of excess movement, that's going to cause some problems like that. But if you hit the clutch and it starts to sound better, and then when you let off the clutch it gets worse, you might have bad thrust washers. Those are the washers that sit on your main cap, in between the main cap and the sides of the crankshaft. Because what's happening is when you hit that clutch, you're pushing force onto the crankshaft itself. And so it's making, potentially, this is just a hypothesis, but it's making a knocking noise while it's running. You press the clutch in and you're pushing the crankshaft up against the main cap. It's small movements. It's not like huge movements here, but it's a small amount, and it's removing the thing that is making that knocking noise, that thrust washer. Just a guess, I had an issue like that in my car. And ultimately, you have to take the engine apart. You got to remove the crankshaft, get new thrust washers. Get new thrust washers, potentially get new bearings. All that stuff. So that could be one issue. The primary gear bushings could be bad. If that's the case, you can get those rebushed and get them back into spec. Although, if that's the case, I don't know. I'd probably check it over if you have the engine out of the car already. Alexander says, hey Cole, so excited to see your build. Thanks, man. Thanks for joining the live stream. Sam says, hey Cole, how you doing, buddy? Doing pretty good. My mouth is getting a little dry now after chatting so long. That's why I got this water in here, though. Matthew Keller says, what's your opinion on the 7-port and the 8-port engines, or heads? So, I don't know big differences between the 7 and 8 ports. I don't know how they are in comparison with power or performance. I don't know of any 8-port heads, though, that are set up to use individual throttle bodies. At least most of the 8-port heads, I think, are catered towards the Weber carburetors, where the 7-port heads are, I think there's more available to install individual throttle bodies, electronic fuel ignition, and injection, things like that. But I don't know the differences between the two, really. Stuart says heater can be used for extra cooling when the engine gets hot. Just open the windows. Yeah, that is true, but it gets hot in the summer in Florida. I mean like hot, 40, 41 Celsius, 100% humidity. Feels like you're swimming through the air. I'm glad I don't live in Florida. It's a little too hot for me. Not that it's that much better here in North Carolina, but a little bit. Paul Hotson says to use the red spot cones. I have not had any experience with those, but I've heard good things about them. Those are technically the performance cones that go in the car, so they might be a good thing to check out, and heard some good things about them. All right. Let's set this back over here. What else you guys got for me? We have about 20 minutes left on the live stream, and what are we up to now? $142. So our goal was 500, but I don't know. It doesn't sound like we are going to hit 500 by the end of the live stream. I want to, but let's try and at least hit $200 by the end of the live stream. And all the money, in case you don't know, is going to UNICEF, a worldwide organization that's partnered with the WHO. I wanted something that would help everybody, not just folks in the U.S., although I love my U.S. buddies. The whole world is going through this. Let's see if we can raise a little bit more money and help with the COVID-19 relief. Andrew says, also, second question, any insight to soundproofing? Yeah, so normally with soundproofing, a lot of people think that they'll put one mat in there and it'll do it, it's done. But normally it's a combination of things that you need to put in. First is the butyl mat. It's like a tar mat with aluminum foil looking stuff on one side. That is a vibration dampener. You don't have to coat the whole car in that stuff, but you put it on the panels that are vibrating the most or that would presumably vibrate the most. Once you put that on, then you want to add a closed cell foam or some sort of actual sound absorption mat. So the butyl reduces the vibrations, and then your closed cell foam or a jute, like a fabric material that's used a lot. Those are what are going to absorb the sound. So with those two things in combination with each other, you usually can achieve some pretty incredible results. Classic Mini Garage says you can use the Genviews on an 8-port, but the 8-port needs specific camshaft, and it's a much more expensive conversion overall. There you go. That's some good information. Tristan says, how's it cold? Do you have a heat reflective tape foil on the intake manifold? Yeah, so the silver stuff that's on the manifold over here is the heat reflective tape. That was provided by Stuart. That's part of the kit that he sends over. I put a heat reflective gold tape in the engine bay across the bulkhead, and then because the supercharger sits right on top of the engine here, I'm going to bring it down, sits right on top of the exhaust, so bring the supercharger over here. So you can see, that's what the supercharger looks like when it's sitting on the back of the engine. It's actually kind of ridiculous looking. These exhaust pipes right here actually can radiate and heat soak this intake manifold. So I sent my manifold off to a company called Jet Hot, and they did a ceramic coating on this. It's rated for 2,500 degrees. The coating gets done on the outside and the inside. It also prevents rust, which is pretty cool. But it keeps the heat inside the pipes and going down and outside the back of the car, which is great because then it'll help this supercharger stay cool, in addition to my charge cooler here. So the combination of these three things are going to be hopefully pretty helpful. Alright, what else do we have here? Steve Hackett says, hi, have a Mini Cooper Sports Pack, started once, it started once, then won't start fuel gauge, not working, but have plenty of spark, changed 8 key phobia battery, but still no luck. Steve, UK. I'm not sure I fully understand what's going on. So it started once. Now it won't start. The the fuel gauge is not working. You have plenty of spark, so you have spark on the plugs. I'm not sure what Change 8 Key Phobia battery is. I'm not familiar with that. Yeah, let me know. I'm not quite sure what you're asking there. Matt says, yeah, I agree. Just easier to balance on an 8-port, isn't it? The 7-port still shares an exhaust port. Yeah, I mean, a shared exhaust port is less problematic than a shared intake port, because at the point that it's at the exhaust, you're not really trying to determine how much fuel should be going into the cylinders. It's post-combustion, and if you have something that's reading the fuel mixture at the end of the exhaust, you're going to get an average reading anyway, unless you're reading at each individual exhaust port, which you can do technically, I guess. I don't know why you would want to though. But most of it happens at a collection point. The measurement happens there if you're using fuel injection. So it's going to try and average out the fuel that's being delivered to all 4 cylinders anyway. Edward Isaac says, other than your engine conversion, are you changing anything else on the car, like little extra gauges or interior stuff, etc.? So my car's already been changed out quite a bit. I have a big rally dashboard on there that was custom made by a guy in the UK, and that serves my exact needs. That's what I've wanted since I got the car. So I have all the gauges on there that I need. There is going to be an LCD panel that comes with the EFI that gives me all of the kind of readout information, let me control the actual details of the fuel injection. That is going to be, I've got that tucked away because I don't want to see the screen because it's not classic looking. Otherwise, the interior of the car, long term, I do need to reupholster the seats. They are in rough shape. I've just put them through their paces and I've kind of beat the snot out of them. So they need to be replaced. The coverings, the seats themselves are great. I don't want to replace those. Trying to think of anything else. Carpet's good. I changed out the fuel tanks because it's a fuel injection system. I needed a return, so it's one of the SPI fuel tanks. So it has a feed and a return. Long term, I do want to repaint the car, but it's not something that I have the budget nor the time to do right now. Maybe one day, but the car's pretty much where I want it as far as interior goes. Barton Powell says, what's your favorite color for a Mini? I could lie and say that it's the blue that's on my Mini, and I do love the blue on my Mini, but it's not my favorite. My favorite is a kind of like a semi-flat gray. I really like that color, like a light grayish color with black wheels, maybe black, all the chrome items blacked out. Maybe not. Maybe all the chrome left chrome. I don't know. That one's a toss-up for me. Yeah, gray body, maybe a black roof, maybe the same gray roof. I don't think white looks good too. Any combination of gray and black and chrome and white. That's my hot spot right there. Amelia says, hi from New Zealand, love your Mini. Thanks for joining, and that's really nice of you to say. Thank you. I love my Mini too. Well, most of the time. Tristan says, awesome stuff. I had my stage 2 manifold, just like yours, ceramic coated a few months ago. I couldn't be happier with it. I'm keen to fit a supercharger next, but I need to look into decompressing the motor, but preferably without changing the pistons. Yeah, so I technically went the more expensive route by disassembling the engine, taking it all out, and doing all that. If you want to, a lot of people, now technically a decompression plate is not like the preferred way to do it, but tons of people do this, and if you've got a flat head and a flat block, and the decompression plate is also flat, and you've got 2 good head gaskets, because you'll need 2, one for the top and the bottom of the plate, you can get a really great performance out of it. I don't want to discount a decompression plate because it's a great solution for someone who doesn't want to spend a bajillion dollars on an engine trying to get it supercharged, and you can get a really great result out of that. You know, there's this idea that, you know, you have to wait until you can get the engine absolutely perfect in order to do all the things you want to do. But sometimes if you want something that's fun, it's okay to not spend a lot of money. Can't let YouTube demonetize me there. Can't spend a lot of money on, and you know, you can still get a really great engine. So my basically what I'm getting at is, you know, think about a decompression plate. If you want some fun, you want to just bolt it on, bolt the supercharger on, and hit the road. You know, if you have the engine out, you know, then maybe consider decompressing it with pistons instead of the plate, because that's technically the more desirable way to do it. You're also going to have a stronger engine and head setup. Steve says, sorry, changed the battery in the immobilizer. Car started once, now won't start. Plenty of spark, but no fuel. My guess is that immobilizer is causing you problems. I don't have an immobilizer on my car, so I can't speak a lot to this, but I know one of my best friends has a Mini that used to have an immobilizer on it, and he constantly had problems with it. It very frequently would immobilize the car, even when there was no reason to immobilize it. I would do a little bit of Googling on that, because I don't have a recommendation there for you aside from immobilizers can cause problems, and there is a fix for it. I just can't remember what it is. Andrew says, have you seen the hollowed out dashboard style? What are your thoughts on that? My wife and I are debating about which dashboard style to go with. Hollowed out, so are you referring to the ones that kind of pop out of the space where your dash is, or something that is empty on the sides with the center binnacle in the middle? Because that's what I had on my car when I got it, you know, with the actual shelves accessible. I really liked that, although those shelves did end up being kind of a catch-all for everything when I got in the car, so that's one thing to think about. Michael Rennick says, white on a Mini is a pain in the rear. It's hard to keep oil off the paint. Yep. The white stripes on my hood actually provide quite a lot of pain while I'm cleaning the car. They almost always have, you know, something on them, and I have to spend more time on those. The roof is also white on my car, but that doesn't generally cause me as much problem, I guess, just because you're not handprints all over your roof. Edward Isaac says, Steve, if it's an immobilizer, then your starter won't turn either. I've had similar issues. What about an electric fuel pump? Tristan says, my motor is still fresh, so if I can get away with a decompression plate at first, I think it would be a great option. Thanks. Yep, that's basically what I'm getting at. Stuart actually usually sends a decompression plate with these kits, depending on, you know, what you tell him your setup is. The supercharger that I'm giving away, which, by the way, if you haven't seen, I am giving away a supercharger. To get entries into that giveaway, just pick up some merch at my merch store. But the kit that he provides usually is one with a decompression plate in it. So you get the decom plate, the VMAX supercharger inlet manifold setup, and then depending on which intake method you go with, the giveaway is for a carbureted setup. But you can do carbureted or EFI, and he'll send that with the kit as well. Classic Mini Garage, the MPI has an inertia fuel cutoff switch on the bulkhead near the wiper motor. That's something to check as well. Alright, we're still at $142, and we've only got about 6 minutes left. So let's try and get to $150, round it out at $150, to get some donations in and support this relief fund. I think it's really, really important. I know a lot of you, probably all of you, are stuck at home right now, self-isolating or in total lockdown like we are, and so it's impacting everybody. If you have a few dollars to spare, a few pounds, a few euros, Australian dollars, pennies, whatever, you know, consider supporting the channel by supporting this effort right here. Make a donation, and I will be delivering all of those funds directly to UNICEF for that relief fund. Amelia Law says, would you send a supercharger to me? I'm assuming you're asking if the giveaway is open to everybody, and the giveaway is open to the entire world. Stuart is based out of the UK, so the supercharger is actually going to be coming from there. But I will work with him and make sure that we can get that shipped anywhere in the world. So if you enter in, rest assured that I will send it to you, no matter where you are, unless the country has some sort of limitation about mailing stuff, like if you live in North Korea or something. Edward Isaac says, keep it up with a super sticker at £5. Thank you so much for your donation. That puts us real close. $148. I had to check to see what the conversion rate was factoring out. So we need $2 more to meet our goal of 150. I think we can do it, folks. $2. Come on. Help out some people. Help them out, and let's get this COVID stuff behind us so we don't have to deal with this anymore here in the world. While we are waiting for, we've only got a few more minutes. Do you guys have any other questions you want to ask me while you have me here? Now these Q&As are definitely the best time to ask me questions. I do my best to respond to all the emails and things like that, but sometimes I get behind, and this is a great time to ask me something. Maybe you have questions about the supercharge build you want to ask, or the Mini, or anything. What did I have for breakfast? What have you. Classic Mini Garage, thank you so much. Paul, thank you so much for donating the additional £2, which brings us to $150. That is incredible. Thank you, everybody, for donating. Mini Driven Car Club, what's your first car? My first car was, I'm sure a lot of people are not going to like this very much. I had a Honda Element. I believe it was only a US based car, but if you remember it, it was basically a box. And it was not the prettiest car in the world, but I loved that car. It had so much space in the back. Excuse me. I had so much space in the back. I could carry whatever I needed. It had like rubber floors, so I could have my dogs back there, and I mean, it was the best car. Love that car. Ilya says, I do have a little bit of rust on the bottom of the doors. I want to clean the rust off and protect it for rust in the future. What would you recommend as a primer for bare metal? Zinc primer, any good? Really any sort of like spray-on metal, bare metal primer is going to work. The key is to make sure that you get all the rust off of it first, and then be extra careful about overspray, because overspray is really, really easy to get overspray onto other parts of the door. It always finds a way on there, so definitely make sure you mask everything off. But the key is getting that rust off of there. Make sure that you get all of the rust removed before you prime it. Steve says, great question answer vlog. Thanks so much, Steve, and thank you for joining in. Edward says, well done, Cole. Can't wait to see the next engine update. Any idea when the next vid will be released? 100% it will be released this week. We are going to be getting the head on. I mean, obviously the head and everything is already on, as you've seen. The gearbox is on. That video should be coming out Tuesday for my patrons and Wednesday for the rest of the world. Haley says, come on guys, at least make it to the original goal of 200. It's all going to UNICEF for COVID-19 relief. 50 more, that's it. Yeah. Thanks, wife. Come on, folks. Technically, we only have 2 minutes left. Think we can do $50 in 2 minutes? I think we can do it. I'll keep it going if you think you guys can get it up to 200. Steve says, do you have videos on small bore engines? I have 2 separate builds that I did for on 998s. I have none on 850s, but I do have the 998 videos. There was one called the Super 998. I have playlists for these on my channel. You check them out. Super 998 was about putting a 1275 head on a 998 block. That was a lot of fun, really turned out great. And then I have an early 998 video. That was a Cooper 998, which was a high compression 998 from Canada, and that I went full rebuild, gearbox, everything from start to finish on that as well. So definitely both of those are playlists on my channel if you want to check them out. Mini Driven Car Club says, what would be your dream Mini? I'm pretty close to it on this car. I like this supercharger setup. I don't know that I could be much happier than what I've got. I'm currently building now. As far as the body goes, I really, really like a mini pickup. I know that they're less comfortable in the passenger compartment, and well, that's basically it. I'm a tall person, and for tall people, the engine or the passenger compartment's pretty not tall person friendly. But I definitely want a pickup. They're so expensive now, and I know they're only going to get more expensive, which is kind of a shame. But I would really like a mini pickup. I'd like it in a gray or a black. And man, I would drive that all the time. And I'd probably want to do some sort of maybe a turbo or a super build on that as well. Steve says, thanks from the UK. Thank you very much. Thanks for saying that. All right, folks. Well, it is 3 p.m. and that is going to wrap up our hour here of live stream Q&A. I want to thank everybody who donated. Really, really appreciate it. We did hit $150, which is incredible. That's going to go a long way to get respirators and masks for people, food, and help people who are in high-risk situations, get the care that they need. So thank you so much for donating. Thank you so much for joining in. And like I said, my next video on the supercharge build is coming out Tuesday for patrons, Wednesday for everybody else. And if you want to win a supercharger, check out my merch store. And any purchase on the store enters you to win a supercharger for your Mini. So, you know the drill, guys. Enjoy those Minis and motor on. See you next time.